Tahoe's communities, addressing prosperity for Tahoe's residents. And we have our panel here. Heidi Hill-Drum, who's the Executive Director of the Tahoe Prosperity Center, is going to lead the panel. And then we also have Jesse Walker from New Economics and Advisory, and B. Gorman from the Lake Tahoe South Shore Chamber of Commerce. And then also Wendy David, who is a board member of the Tahoe Prosperity Center and the mayor of the city council, is also here. And
typical mouthful of food.
And then I'd also like to thank the other organizing groups of the Tahoe Talks, the Lake Tahoe Bicycle Coalition, the League to Save Lake Tahoe, the City of South Lake Tahoe, and the Lake Tahoe Sustainability Collaborative. So I'm going to pass around a sign-in sheet. If people would sign in, that would be great. And if you're not already on our newsletter, the TRK's newsletter where we announce these Tahoe Talks, and you want to check the box next to your name, we'll add you. And then also Heidi has a sign up for the Tahoe Prosperity Center's newsletter, so that's a separate one. So you can do that. And then we have, for people who haven't been here, we always just pass around a little survey, just to give us some feedback on how you like the talk, or if you have ideas for things we can do in the future to make it better. That would be great. So I'll pass those around also. And then next month, January 20th, we have a talk called How to City, From Idea to Reality, Making a Community Project Happen. And so that'll be talking with city staff and a representative from the city council, and also local community members who have brought forward successful projects like the bike park, just to talk and hear how you bring something forward that you want to be successful. So, here's a pen for signing in. Thank you, Heidi. So, yeah, I think we'll get started. Okay. Thank you guys again for coming. Really excited about it.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for being here. As I mentioned when I was encouraging you all to sit at the table, we want this to be a conversation ongoing throughout the presentation, so we're not going to just stand up here and do a presentation and then you might wait until the end to ask questions. We'd really like you to ask questions about things as we go through. And then if I could just make a request, because we don't have enough time to do introductions, but when you ask a question, if you have a question, if you could introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are, that would be really awesome. So again, I'm Heidi. I'm the Executive Director of the Tahoe Prosperity Center, and I have next to me my two favorite board members right now. Sorry, Wendy. But Bea Gorman, as you know, is the Tahoe Chamber CEO, and she is also very involved in the Tahoe Prosperity Center, has been from the very beginning, and is really very much, I think, the visionary behind much of the work that's happening now with the Tahoe Prosperity Center. And then Jesse Walker is the chair of our Indicators Committee, which is the committee that produced the Measuring for Prosperity report. So you can download the full report from our website. I have only a couple copies because these things they cost a lot to print, and we're a small nonprofit. But the full report, we couldn't have done it without Bea and Jesse and our board chair Sandy's involvement. And so I really appreciate all the extra time that as board members they put in on a volunteer basis. So that is Bea and Jesse. And then really just quickly, as Karen mentioned, our mission is uniting Tahoe's communities to strengthen regional prosperity. So we were just founded in 2011 after the unprecedented collaborative effort that developed the 2010 Prosperity Plan. So I'm going to let Bea give you a little bit more background on the actual history, and then Jesse will talk a little bit about our Mission for Prosperity report, and then we'll talk about some of our upcoming work in 2016. So thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Heidi. So the moral of this is if you hang around long enough, you get to be the historian, and suddenly I find myself in that position. So the Prosperity Center, as Heidi mentioned, was born out of an unprecedented effort where we brought together all 5 of the counties, the city, and business, education leaders, and a variety of other interested folks. And we went to the federal government and we basically said, we have a challenge here in the Tahoe Basin. The only thing that really ever gets funded here and that people talk about here is the environment. How do we change that dialogue so that we start to talk about the implications of policy on community, what's happening in our communities? And at that point, we literally had no data to point to conditions within our community. If you wanted data, you were looking at county data, and you were unable to extrapolate what was going on here within the basin. So we were successful in getting all of the jurisdictions to contribute funding to this effort, and we were successful in getting the federal government to match that funding, and out of that came a document that is now known as the Lake Tahoe Basin Prosperity Plan. And that document is online, both the Chambers and at the Prosperity Center website if you're interested. It was published at the end of 2010, and it had a whole litany of strategies that we could here in the basin potentially look to implement in order to strengthen our communities and strengthen our economy. And those two things are really synonymous. I think we would all agree with that. If you have a strong economy, you have a stronger community. You have fewer people in poverty. So some of the data that came out of that plan was the realization of the value of our local economy. So keep in mind, this is data from, or this slide is data from the 2010 report. But it told us that we have a $4.7 billion economy here in the Tahoe Basin. That was a number that no one had been looking at, and it certainly wasn't a number that was being used in terms of going to the federal government and asking for additional support for the basin. You can see the primary, what we term clusters, where that funding or where that economy was coming from. And some of that has shifted in the years since then. But obviously the biggest one is what we all know intuitively, right? Which is visitor services, or what we're now calling hospitality, tourism, recreation, and retail. That's our largest cluster. And having just lived through 4 drought years, there's not a person in this room, I'm sure, who doesn't understand the impact on our communities when our tourism economy takes a hit. They are absolutely tied. Without one, we don't have a healthy community. So the TPC was formed out of this report. One of the recommendations was, in order for the basin to be successful, you were going to have to move beyond having 5 jurisdictions who, in essence, are looking at their citizens' best interests only and not working collaboratively, and you're not going to be able to access federal dollars for projects and initiatives that you might want to pursue in the basin to enhance your economy. So hence was born the Tahoe Prosperity Center. We were born in, thank you very much. We were born in 2011, and the board now is comprised of a broad spectrum of people from all around the Tahoe Basin. It is the only entity of its type in our area. Entities of this nature exist in other communities. There are collaborative economic development initiatives, in fact, all over the United States and Canada and Europe, really, at this juncture. So I think this speaks well to why we needed the entity: 2 states, 6 local governments, 18 regional authorities, 198 planning areas. Needless to say, it's a pretty challenging place to do business. It's kind of complicated. But in order for us to move forward, the board of the Prosperity Center believes very strongly that we need to look at our region as a region, and we need to work collectively as one community. We are one regional economy. And what I would ask you to think about in terms of the economy is to just look at sort of the highways that spider out from the lake. That's our economy too. Our economy is tied to Northern California. Our economy is tied to Reno and Sparks. We are tied to the Carson Valley. We are tied to what happens in El Dorado County. We're tied to what happens in Placer County. And we often tend to think of ourselves as this little island in the mountains, as if we could survive onto ourselves, and that's simply not true. So that is a big part of the role of the Prosperity Center, is to help us look at ourselves from a regional perspective and pursue the opportunities that come from being a region. That doesn't mean communities give up identity or that they don't have their own strategies. It simply means where those things can align and work for the greater good, that we should be thinking about that. So I think that's my history lesson. And I'll turn it over to Jesse and let him talk about the measuring of prosperity.
Okay.
Do you want me to move? Do you want to
I think I can make it work. I've got the slides in front of me too. Okay. The Measuring for Prosperity report. Buckle your seatbelts, everyone. We're going to get into some economic data here, which I think is pretty exciting, and hopefully you do too. Let me give you a little bit of background on what this report is. This is the latest report that's available that shows economic and community data points illustrating progress in economic development throughout the Tahoe Basin. This is that was recommended in the original prosperity plan that he mentioned in 2010. There were a variety of recommendations that came out of that plan. One of them was, look, no one is really tracking economic progress in the basin, especially on a basin-wide format. So the TPC, being a regional organization focused on economic development, we felt like this was right up our alley and something that we could take on. So a couple of years ago, we really sort of ramped up our efforts on this and assembled a committee of board members to help push this through. It was a large amount of work, I'll say, that was necessary to pull this off. We started looking at all the other economic reports that had been prepared in the basin in recent years so that we could make sure that we were building on existing data that was already in place. We weren't recreating the wheel. We looked at all the different data points that were available on a basin-wide basis, and that in and of itself is a pretty substantive challenge, given the fact that, if you sort of recall that slide that was up a moment ago, we have 5 counties, 1 incorporated city, 2 states, and the political boundaries of the basin doesn't follow economic data very well. It's a watershed, so it's difficult to assemble that type of data. But we figured out sort of what data points we felt like would really help tell the story of economic progress in Lake Tahoe. We wrote a scope of work. Once we felt comfortable with what we felt like this report could look like, we wrote a scope of work and went to an RFP process to find some consultants who could carry this out for us. And it also entailed fundraising. So luckily enough, we were able to find some partners who are willing to donate some funding to help make this report happen, because it's not cheap. So again, we ramped up these efforts a couple of years ago. We got our consultant on board probably about a year ago, I would say, and it took them several months to conduct the report. And we now have this beautiful document here that came out in late October. And again, this is available on our website, and I hope that you all will take a look and give us feedback on what you find. I'll talk a bit about the scope of the report itself. It's generally organized around 17 indicators that we selected. And we selected these 17 indicators for various reasons. We wanted them to meet certain criteria that we set out. We wanted this data to be available basin-wide. We wanted it to be readily available and relatively easily accessible and inexpensive. Again, funding is an issue. And we wanted to be able to show current and historical data broken down by geographic area where possible, so that we could really go in and see sort of how we as a basin are progressing and how the different communities around the lake are progressing. So these are the 17 indicators that we selected. I won't read them off, but you can see them here. We broke them down into economic indicators and community indicators, and we felt like that was going to give us a good, robust sample size to really tell some interesting stories about economic and community progress. In order to go through all 17 of those indicators, we'd be here all week probably, so I just wanted to provide some high-level conclusions here and some of the interesting stories that I think came out of it. So this first bullet point here talks about population, and as probably most of you know and understand, Lake Tahoe's been experiencing population declines for a long, long time. I was born here and grew up here, and as far back as I can remember, we've been talking about losing our full-time residential population. But what's interesting is, for the first time that we can see for the past several decades, in 2013 we actually saw a population increase in the basin. 2013 is unfortunately the most recent data that was available using the source that we used. And it was just a 1-year incline. So you see many, many years of going down and then 1 year of going up. So it's kind of like, we can get a little bit excited about it, but we need more data to see whether that's just sort of a blip in the road, or if maybe this is a sustained trend where we're going to see population increases in the basin over time. Either way, I think it's sort of an interesting story and something that we're going to want to pay attention to and plan for accordingly. The second bullet talks about the sort of economic makeup in the basin, and Bea really alluded to that previously in her slides. No surprise, tourism is the economic driver of Lake Tahoe. But what we did notice is that tourism as a percentage of total economic activity actually declined over the past 10 years. So tourism was about 50% of employment in the basin in 2013. In 2003, and it went down to 44% in 2013. Looking at some of the more recent data that pertains to tourism, we see some other stories. TOT, or hotel tax revenue, is one way to measure tourism performance. And if we look over the past few years, we've seen TOT growth in Lake Tahoe, which is good. However, if you look at the more long-term trends, you'll see that TOT is still basically about where we were before we headed into the recession. Took a massive dip and now sort of back on the upswing. We're sort of back where we were in 2006, 2007. But what I find kind of interesting is looking at the growth in the last few years. And then when you compare it to some other areas, we can sort of see how Tahoe stacks up. So shown on the slide here, basically from 2010 to 2014, if you look at California overall, it experienced hotel tax or TOT revenue growth of 9% per year during that time frame. Colorado experienced about 7.6% annual growth, and Tahoe experienced 5.5% annual growth. So it's good, we're growing, that's a positive thing, but we're not really keeping up with some of the other areas that we might want to compare ourselves to. Personally, I don't know, I wasn't tremendously shocked seeing that Colorado's outperforming us, but it was a surprise to me that California overall is going up faster than Tahoe is. We should at least be keeping up with California, in my view. And the state overall is kicking our butt. We're losing market share.
Jesse, when you were calculating the TOT, were you calculating the total amount of revenue that's TOT or the visits?
Revenue.
Okay, so it could also be reflective of different communities that charge a higher percentage of TOT?
Correct.
I'm sorry.
The other thing that Jesse, if you adjust this for inflation, we've lost revenue.
Okay.
This is unadjusted inflation dollars he's looking at. If you adjust it, go back to year 2000, and we are so far behind.
Yeah.
We haven't kept pace. That's why all your budgets are tight. We just don't have enough revenue circulating in the economy, and adjusted for inflation, it's horrendous. So these numbers are not surprising. I see these numbers. So
good. All right. Thank you.
And I wanted to ask also, in the annual TOT growth on Wendy's question, does that average in the vacation home rental, VHR market?
If they're paying their
Some
taxes.
of which is
If they're paying,
reported, some of which is not.
Exactly.
So, and maybe it's hard to
True,
get a good
yeah.
figure.
So those
Maybe
issues
it's
are
hard to
happening
get a
every
good
few
figure.
years.
It is not easy, and you're right, a lot of these vacation rentals don't pay their taxes, so that's not captured. That's a good point.
Thank you.
but I think Carl's point is important, which is that is not uncommon from what is happening
We're
in
not
other
unusual to the
communities.
market. We're standard distribution of what goes on in every community, every destination in the state, so it's relative. I think Jesse's bigger point is the biggest source of income in this community is going like this. And it's gonna keep going like that until we have very, very different strategies to change the dynamics. And it's not marketing. So,
I think one thing that might be helpful, just because you called out the California, is a lot of times people don't necessarily equate that. So for those of you who aren't in this industry, Monterey is our competition, Sonoma is our competition, Napa is our competition. So people are making decisions on a weekly basis as to where they're going to go to spend their weekends. We're only one of many options you have if you're in Northern California. And when we put up slides and presentations and we show maybe Sonoma and South Lake Tahoe, I'll hear people say, well, so what? We're not Sonoma. Well, that's the what, is that people are making that choice.
Yeah.
Hey, can you go back to the 44% in terms of tourism employment? The next biggest chunk on the slide previously was the environment, when you're looking at all revenue dollars. Do the revenue dollars correspond with employment there? I.e., is the environmental support contribute about 25% of the employment here?
I don't know the answer to that question. It wasn't something that was looked at in this study specifically. Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that.
Because as a relatively new resident, it's sort of startling that only 44% of our revenues come from tourism-related industries. It sure feels like it's a lot more than that in the environment.
So what I might suggest is if you're interested and if you download the report, in the appendix are a number of charts that show the employment sectors and break that down, so you find, I think, what you're looking for in there.
Thanks.
Thanks. That is a very good segue because that is my next slide to talk about employment. So that was one of the, another one of the big sort of conclusions that came out of this report, looked at employment, and what we've seen is fairly substantive declines in the number of jobs in the basin overall, and I'll go through some charts that sort of show that. And then we do have some change in the composition of those jobs. So I talked about the decline in the percentage share of jobs in tourism, and we'll see where some of that is made up in other areas. This chart here shows total employment, so total jobs in the basin, and they've broken it down among these four major categories. So the top line that's sort of orange there, those are visitor serving jobs. And as you can see, over the past decade, large declines, and we've just been sort of flat, bumping along since around 2009. The next line down in green, those are what they call your recession type jobs. So those are jobs that were most associated with the Great Recession starting in 2006, 2007. So jobs in finance, real estate, retail. Those are the jobs that pretty much every community lost, and you can see we lost a large number of those jobs as well. And sort of, it's been flat in the last 30 years. What I think is kind of interesting is this yellow line. And those are services sector jobs. So those tend to be more stable, higher paying, white collar jobs, some of the jobs that I think we'd like to see to round out our local economy. And I think it's kind of interesting that actually is showing an increase over the past 10 years, which we can't say for many of these other industries. The bottom line there is, we don't really need to talk about too much, it's just what they call our economic base, and that consists of more standard economic base jobs like manufacturing, utilities, transportation, warehousing, things that just aren't a big part of the Tahoe economy to begin with.
Would those be like government kind of jobs?
Government jobs are probably, I'd have to double check, but I think those are probably lumped in the services category. But they show those breakdowns in the report, by the way, so we can check that. Another big story that I think came out of the report was changes to household income. If we break it down, it's basically, generally, household incomes are quite low in the basin as compared to other areas throughout the two neighboring states. And they're continuing to decline, not even keeping up with inflation. And because of these low incomes, housing affordability is becoming a major concern. And we can illustrate the jobs, or the income picture by looking at this chart. This shows median per capita income in various areas. That top line is North Lake Tahoe. What sort of stood out to me about this chart was how much higher incomes actually are in the North Lake Tahoe area. But they've sustained pretty large declines over the past few years. The red line here, sort of in the middle, that's the basin overall, the average. So you can see we're sitting, we started above 30,000 per capita in 2010, and now we're below 30,000 per capita in 2013. And again, these are not adjusted for inflation, so unfortunately the picture is actually worse than it's shown here. The bottom line in orange is the South Lake Tahoe per capita income. As you can see, it's low. It's much lower than the average income in California, lower than the average income in Nevada. And, seeing some slight inclines from 2012 to 2013, but in general, it's just sort of flat. And if you do adjust that one for inflation, it's actually declining.
Is that California and Nevada as a whole, or the California and Nevada portion of the basin?
As a whole.
I see one point that it's important to realize when you talk about population and income growth rates. If those things don't increase, it has an impact on things like, does the hospital want to stay here? It's far beyond just the immediate, issue of jobs. It's the supporting services that you begin to come on the radar and say, well, the hospital just doesn't make it here. You get a clinic instead of a hospital. And so there's all this interrelationship that's far beyond just jobs and income.
Yeah,
that is
absolutely
important to understand. And when jobs are low, that puts impact on social services, which costs government, which increases crime and all the social statistics. And it's a very complicated little nest of things.
The other area where the rubber really hits the road for local residents is housing affordability.
Absolutely.
And so that's a key issue that is related to income. And let's go on here. So one interesting thing that came out of the study, they looked at the ratio of, I think I've got this, it should be the ratio of home value to household income. So that's okay. So in Reno, that ratio is 5 to 1. So to put some actual numbers to it that I'm just making up out of thin air, if that average household income in Reno was $100,000, the average home value would be $500,000. Okay, and that's sort of a normal ratio, 5 to 1. It's actually a little bit high. You often see 3 to 1 or 4 to 1 is better. 5 to 1 is okay. In San Francisco, where we know that they have some pretty serious home housing affordability issues, that ratio is 8 to 1. And in Tahoe, it's actually 10 to 1. So we've got problems. And it's exacerbated by the fact that, I showed earlier the income trends. The income trends are going down. I didn't show this in the chart, but I think that we all sort of know housing prices are going up. So it's just getting worse, the longer we go here. So, in my opinion, we've got to figure out a way to soften that blow and make it easier for our local residents to afford housing.
And just a quick question, how related is the rent? Because we have so many people who rent, is that a place that it's factored in? Or?
Yeah, we don't have those statistics in the report, but I think that they would mirror what we see. It's all sort of related, so mirror the same trends.
Yeah, incomes, housing prices can be tracked really easily, so they were in the report,
but the
rents
rent
are not.
is tough, yeah.
But I hear
it's a moving
anecdotally,
target.
people say all the time that it's getting harder and harder.
To even find
most definitely.
rentals.
Yeah, and I remember when I moved here 20 years ago, it was hard to find a house to rent because I had a dog, but now, it's tough.
And the largest source of affordable housing at the lake is going away this next summer.
Which is?
The Tahoe Shores Mobile Home Park is being torn down and being replaced with giant vacation condos. That's of over 250 people that will no longer have any place to live.
And a lot of families in there,
Yeah.
Carl?
So,
No, I think it
sorry,
was.
Ed.
Go ahead.
No, okay, Carl.
I think what has to happen is we have to change our view and be way more creative on how we think of housing. If you look at the way some of the developments are going around the country, we don't think in terms of small houses anymore.
Control prices. What goes up has to come down and level out. So you really end up with a boom bust economy.
Yeah, but a lot of our valuations are driven by San Francisco and Northern California also. The supply and demand, the economics go far beyond our base, and there's a whole different, it's very complicated. It's too complicated for me, I don't
So
understand.
you guys want to maybe go on some more slides so we
Yeah.
can get to it?
Okay. Let
I
me
still
move.
want to come back to housing because I think that's something that we need to talk about. At the end, we can talk about some ideas because, but let's finish a couple more slides because there's other good stuff.
Okay. Okay. So another topic that was discussed in the report is the impact of redevelopment, and you know, I've displayed a lot of statistics and a lot of bad news, but I think this is one area where we can actually look at some good news. And what they found in the report is that the areas that have undergone redevelopment are actually performing much better than a lot of the other areas around the city. So sort of the takeaway is that that stuff is working. The market is responding positively to reinvestment, and we need more of that stuff to really right the ship. So just to conclude this section on the Measuring for Prosperity report itself, I would encourage you all to take a look at the report, and even, you know, it's, 70 pages, I think, or something like that. There's an executive summary. Take a look at some of the conclusions and see what resonates with you. There's a lot of really good sort of discussion fodder, I think, that we have just found in this report. So read it, you know, talk to your friends and family and coworkers and elected officials, and let's use this to you know, shine a light on some issues that we need to address. And get back to us with comments and questions about the report. So like I said, this came out a month or two ago. Our plan is to continually update this report to see, you know, what's changed. And we're not exactly sure when the next update will occur. It's probably contingent on funding. We'd like to do it as frequently as possible. But if you have comments or questions or want to give us some feedback so that we can make the next version better, you know, let us know. We're also planning to do some additional studies on some other topics that were highlighted or came to light, I guess, through the report. One of those is the impact on our local workforce of trends in the economy. And I think, you know, we'd also like to do something related to housing as well. So, you know, stay tuned for those types of things. And like I said, definitely give us feedback.
Yeah, based on the interest, I suspect